So since I have the floor for a minute, I'm going to do a bit of a turnabout because something that you don't know about Louise, I doubt most of you know. Louise led a team that saved DND from another Phoenix pay system disaster. In this case, it was a transformation, an IT system transformation from one major logistics platform to another. The project manager, a couple of years later, got a deputy minister's commendation for doing it. She's the one who kept him off the rocks and kept him on the straight and narrow. And she kept me on the straight and narrow in a lot of ways too. So thank you for the invitation to come. I'm very pleased to be able to speak to you. What I'm going to talk about is my path to writing the book, and I'll talk a little bit about what's in the book as well, but spend more time talking about how I got here and why. So my background, and Louise gave you a little bit of this, but I had an unusual background in the Canadian Armed Forces. So I was selected early on to study applied defense technology in the UK, the Royal Military College of Science in the UK, and the British Army School of Ammunition, and I qualified as an ammunition technical officer. And that kind of shunted me into major capital procurement projects and ammunition procurement and other stuff like that. And I happened to be in a job sort of semi-related to all that when the Chrétien government and Paul Martin as the finance minister launched a major financial restructuring of the government of Canada that saw the Department of Defense's budget cut by about a third over the space of a number of years. And so the department was forced to undergo a major rethink about its whole structure, how it commanded control itself, how it managed itself. And I was in a job that stuck me into the middle of that. Which strangely enough connected me with some other folks, so this is a whole series of connections in my career that sent me eventually to Kingston, to the Land Force Doctrine and Training Center, now called there. So I worked with General Mike Jeffrey to stand up, create that organization. And it was not because I was a great Army guy. I mean, I'd been in the techie side of the business, but I had crossed paths with Mike Jeffrey in the course of that, and he wanted me to come and help him sort out his organizational issues there. And that further led me onto a couple of key appointments on the Army staff a few years later. And then I went back into the materiel business as the strategic planner for the materiel group. And when I took my uniform off, I found myself as the senior director responsible for material acquisition and support, business policy, business processes, and standards. And at the same time, for 2 years, I chaired a NATO committee on systems lifecycle management. So I've had this journey through different corners of national defense that most military people don't get to see. I also had the honor of twice commanding military units. One was Canadian Forces Ammunition Depot Angus, which is in the Borden area. And the second one was the Canadian contingent of the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force on the Golan Heights. And in that role, I also commanded the UN Joint Canada-Japan Logistics Battalion, which opened my eyes to some interesting perspectives in global affairs. And then when I retired in 2013, I began sitting back and thinking about all of that and researching and writing about defense issues, and connected with the Conference of Defense Associations Institute and became their first fellow. And I'm still hanging around the place, so now they call me a senior fellow. So the next question I wanted to talk about is why. What gave me the chutzpah to think that I could write the book? So why have it in the first place? To fill a gap. I'm not aware. I've done a lot of reading about defense issues. I've never seen a product or a publication like this that's really aimed at the average citizen of the country. I also experienced in a number of conversations with people and in following public debate about defense issues, I felt that in many cases the discussion was not very well informed, didn't really have a very good understanding of some underlying things that had to be factored into the kinds of decisions that were being talked about. I also felt that the average citizen could do with some guidance and some insights into how to assess how well the defense business is being run by the governments that they elect. And then the final motivation was to clear a whole bunch of stuff out of my brain so that I could start to think about other things. So what I started with was a bunch of writings that I'd collected over a number of years, and I thought, well, I could package that and turn that into something useful, and very quickly came to the conclusion that it needed to be a more coherent narrative, so I had to substantially rewrite some of those things. Others I just rejected. And so I did a fresh start to the writing process. When I thought I had a reasonable draft, I started approaching various publishers who I know deal with defense issues, and the silence was deafening. So I came to the realization that probably what I needed to do was do some more work on it, first of all, and then choose a different path to getting it published. Because realistically, the market for this type of book, certainly before the recent interest in defense issues, was going to be pretty limited. So to get it actually published, I realized that the market was small. Looked into self-publishing and other things, and then I found a publisher downtown Ottawa, a guy named Ret'd, a former Queen's printer. I think the last Queen's printer we had in the 90s, the Queen's printer was closed. And so his company, Baco, will walk you through the whole process. My nickel. And he teamed me with a person who could help me doing book layout and all the the mechanical stuff you have to do that. So it's quite a learning experience. The process is quite pricey. The Canada Revenue Agency doesn't help a lot because they, in order to deduct any of the costs associated with getting the thing published, you have to clearly demonstrate an intent and a reasonable prospect of generating some level of income in the process. Teaming with the right layout person is critical. That was a bit rocky, unfortunately, in this case. Just for various reasons, things didn't click as well as they should have. So I learned a lot in the process. And if I were to do it again, knowing the how-tos that I now know, I would do most of that myself. And the other thing I found is that the small publishers are great in terms of their agility and ability to turn things around when things are working well. But nobody's in the publishing business to get rich, and they're operating kind of on the edge of financial solvency. So now I'll talk about the book. So this is what it's designed to be. It's designed with it's kind of a travel guide model in mind. So the first part is the basics, a sketch portrait of national defense. So a sketch portrait doesn't have a lot of detail. It has basically the main outlines of something. So it talks about what national defense is and what it does. And what it does is only 4 things. There's a lot of stuff going on, but it boils down to just 4 things. One is provides advice to government. Second thing, it does force development, which is the design and the building of a future military force. The third thing is called force generation. It is the management of the existing defense capabilities and the generation of force packages for specific missions. And then the last thing is to actually execute those missions. Then the second page of the book starts looking more at the governance, the governance piece, and how does government manage defense, and the critical role of the citizen in the oversight of how well the government is or is not managing defense. And I introduced the idea of stewardship by government. So the government we have has a 4-year mandate typically, and if they're lucky they might get another one, and they might or might not get another one. So they're in a 4-year window where they essentially make all the decisions about the defense institution, about other, the public service and all of the other institutions of the government of Canada. But these things belong to the people of Canada. They don't belong to the members of the government of the day. So the government of the day has a role, in my view, as more defined as being a steward of those assets and institutions while they are in office. And that carries an obligation to not only manage it well today, but also to ensure that they're making the right decisions to make sure that in the future, those institutions and those assets will be fit for purpose. And we don't do that all that well in this country. And then the third part of the book is exploration of a number of specific topics, and people can pick and choose the ones that interest them. They're all standalone chapters. So one of them, first chapter of those is on Canada's place in the world and the NATO 2% defense spending debate. We like to think of ourselves, and our politicians like to tell us, we are a small country punching above our weight in the world. That's bunk. We are not a small country. We are among the top 10 economies in economic power in the world. We're typically number 8 or 9. Our economy, when you level everything to US dollars, our economy is bigger than that of Russia. And so we need to think seriously about what our real place is. Also, in terms of population, Statistics Canada just told us we're 41.5 million people now. That's around number 38, 39 in the world in terms of population out of 200 countries, so we're well up in the top quartile. We are a nation that has the national wherewithal to exercise influence in the world if we want to. That's the governments need to want to, and the population needs to want their government to do that. Next chapter is mission planning, how the Canadian Forces does mission planning. Then there's a chapter on defense procurement, which is a perennial topic of interest, and that's the longest chapter in the book. And then there's a chapter on defense industries, which is another area where we get into periodic debates about whether we should have them, and if we have them, what about defense exports and all of that. And then the last chapter is a financial and statistical analysis where basically just I'm crunching numbers and showing those kinds of trends. So that's what you'll find in the book. There were 4 themes that emerged as I was doing the work, as I was writing the book. The first one was the strategic management of national defense by Canadian governments of any stripe over the last 20, 30 years has been basically transactional. There is not evidence, you don't see evidence of strategic thinking and strategic planning, long-term view of what needs to happen and what decisions need to be taken now in order to make sure that we don't have problems down the road. And the evidence of that is very clear. in the number of times when we have systems that just rust out. And either you have to park them, or they're so difficult to maintain, you're spending more and more money trying to keep airplanes in the sky or ships at sea. And that's a clear sign that you're not making important decisions early enough to make sure you don't have a gap in capability. And it was reported just in the last couple of days that only 40% of our CF-18s can actually fly right now. So the second theme that emerged was achieving unity of effort within government, between government departments, is what I would call a work in progress. And DND, the Canadian Forces, increasingly has to do stuff both on its own, but also with other departments. And when we were in Afghanistan, we had the combat mission, which was a military mission, but we also had the Kandahar Provincial Reconstruction Team, which was a whole of government effort by, at the time, CEDA, Canadian International Development Agency, which is now part of Global Affairs, Department of Foreign Affairs, DND had people there, and then we also had correctional service folks coming in, RCMP, and others. And that was a management nightmare to run that and help ensure that the team who were on the ground could actually get the job done, create integrated plans that would fit all the pieces together. And I was, at that time, in Ottawa, trying to help untangle the legal and policy obstacles to them cooperating on the ground. And we were only somewhat successful in untangling some of that stuff. And there's still work to be done. So we saw things like the pandemic response where some things worked really well, like the distribution of vaccines once we got them. The reason that worked really well was because the National Defence put a team into the Public Health Agency of Canada to help them organize the logistics of that, and then they handed over the process to the Public Health Agency once their folks got up to speed. But other parts of the pandemic response, like the ArriveCAN app and some other stuff, didn't go so well. The policy decisions on what you do with quarantines coming back into the country and that sort of thing. So the pieces just were not knit together very well. The withdrawal of Canadians from Kabul was also a bit of a shambles from all the media reporting. And so our government needs to do some thinking about how it's going to better knit pieces together. It's remarkable the extent to which you see when the Canadian forces are sent, or the Canadian Armed Forces are sent on a job and they're on their own or largely on their own, things go pretty well. But as soon as you get multiple government departments trying to work through an issue, things don't go so well. So that's an area of inquiry, I think, for a future government. To be truthful, also, modernizing Canadian Armed Forces culture remains a work in progress. Although what I have felt in recent reporting is we're not seeing a lot of new cases. We're seeing a lot of cleanup of old cases, but we're not seeing that many new cases. And I think General Carignan, in her work prior to becoming Chief of the Defense Staff and now, and the other folks many other folks that have been involved in trying to get that super tanker turned around, are showing some success there, but it remains to be seen, just when we'll reach perfection in that area. And the final theme that I would like to talk about is that our politicians see everything through political lenses, and that's not good or bad, it just is. The other thing about politicians is I believe they deserve a lot of respect. If you're running for office at any level in this country right now, you're running for a tough job, and the work hours are awful. The pay is so-so for the most part. The amount of abuse that they get, unwarranted in my view, inappropriate in my view. I would not tolerate that. Most of us probably wouldn't. And I have a lot of admiration for the ones who stick it out, and a lot of understanding for those who say, "The hell with this, I'm done." So we need to cut them some slack, and we need to give them the respect that's due to them. On the other hand, we need to hold their feet to the fire. We have the right to expect that if you aspire to a tough job in politics and get it, that you will do it to the very best of your ability. And you will put the public interest in front of everything else. And that has not always happened, and the book talks about a number of instances where the politics, the partisan politics of the situation has led to decisions being taken by governments which are clearly not in the public interest. So I also, just about wrap up, there are several what I call big ideas that are also explored in the book. And these are specific things that I'm hoping that folks in national defense and in government will pick up on at some point. First thing is that we need to scale our level of ambition for having defense forces and how big and what the force structure is to the amount of money we're prepared to put into it. And that has not been the case. Over half of the defense budget goes for personnel costs, military or civilian personnel costs. We are not typically, have not in past years met even the thin NATO guideline of spending 20% of the defense budget on recapitalization of equipment in order to make sure that we don't have equipment rust out. We've been below that, although in the last couple of years it's crept up to about 20%. The problem is that 20% for a country like Canada is not enough. The NATO guideline is for all countries in the alliance, and most of those countries are European countries with limited airspaces and limited maritime areas to cover. Canada has vast air and maritime areas. We need proportionally larger naval and air capabilities than land. I say that as painfully because I'm an Army officer. And naval and air forces are capital intensive, whereas armies are personnel intensive. So we need to be spending more than 20% on recapitalization of equipment if we are going to eliminate the rust out trap that we have been in for many years. I've suggested a minimum of 25%. Australia, with broadly comparable challenges to us, we're currently spending 35% of their defense budget on recapitalization. That's about roughly what the US typically spends. So we should be north of 25 or so, at least. And if we're going to do that, you have to find the money somewhere, and that's really got to come out of the personnel side. You need to shrink the personnel numbers to the level at which you're going to be able to afford to recapitalize your equipment and buy the spare parts and do the operations and maintenance to keep everything working. Otherwise, you get into the imbalances that we have, where we have really great people, but their equipment is useless or parked because it doesn't work. And you don't have a capability if you don't have both the people and the equipment and the infrastructure and everything else. So you need that balance. I talked about the second one. The incumbent governments are stewards of the institution. So I that's one of the big ideas that I hope a future Government of Canada will pick up. And then the third big idea is for those of us who are not in government. As citizens, as voters, I think we have an obligation to ourselves and to our collective well-being to hold governments to account. And so that what the purpose of the book is, to provide some tools so that people can do that. So, for those who are interested in the book, it's available in the shop here. I just checked; they have about 4 copies here. I also have some I can sell, but you don't have to buy it here or now. There are stores in Ottawa and currently Kingston. I haven't been able to get beyond that. The shipping costs are kind of prohibitive in this game, so I'm starting in the regions, in the areas where I can reach. But the book is available online from the Royal Military College of Canada Alumni Association shop, online shop. The Military Communications Electronics Museum in Kingston is also carrying it online, and Indigo is recently put it up online as well. And my last slide is this one. And it's a strange looking slide, I appreciate. What you see there is Canadian, British, and Latvian soldiers lining a road on both sides. And they are saluting Ukrainian soldiers, which have just completed a training program in the UK, run by UK, Canada, and Latvia. And these soldiers that are on their way back to Ukraine for employment on the battlefield. With that, I'm happy to engage in discussion, take questions, debate, or otherwise have conversation. Sorry.
Yeah, you were talking about Canadian citizens being like stewardship of the military. I think that's a bit of a tall order on a country where most citizens don't even have a military, or they think that we're nothing more than UN peacekeepers wearing blue berets somewhere. I mean, it's a big challenge.
Right.
And plus, we have a military that doesn't tell anybody what we do anyway. So, it's a two-way street.
Yeah, so the idea that I tried to put across is that it's really the government of the day which has responsibility for stewardship. And I view the citizen role as more of a guardian. And I take the point that defense issues are not front and center on every citizen's mind when it comes to making a decision about where they're going to cast their vote or how they're going to talk to their MP or whoever. I'm thinking now more people are getting interested in that latter issue, but you're right, it's not the citizen who has the stewardship responsibility, it is the government. And there's, in the chapter, there are different players in that. So there are government ministers have a role, there's a bureaucracy that has a role, and Parliament has an oversight role through parliamentarians, their parliamentary committees, and the officers of Parliament, like the Auditor General, the Parliamentary Budget Office, and others. So that stewardship role is really fundamentally exercised within government, not by the citizen. You're quite right.
It'd be nice if the citizens were that involved.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yes.
Well, as a follow-on, man, like those institutions that you mentioned are that it's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's they're clearly not doing the job. So, any thoughts on how you can restructure or repersonalities? These kind of things that's complicated, but back to governments are transitory very much. So, and so they can't go sometimes
Critical frequencies.
Yeah, I appreciate the difficulty, and I probably skate over a little bit of that political difficulty in the book because I focus more on principles. But actually, parliamentary committees do a pretty good job of highlighting problem areas. What they don't do a good job is articulating them clearly so that a citizen reading about it or a journalist writing a piece about a parliamentary committee report won't necessarily pick up on what they're really saying. So they'll use mealy mouth language because it has to be acceptable to, to the government in power, especially if they're a majority government. The parliamentary committees have to be cautious about how they say things. The parliamentary budget officer and the auditor general can be more blunt about it. So actually, in fact, in the book, I have some examples of parliamentary committee reports, sort of mealy mouth language with an interpretation of what they really mean, and a little more forthright. So you have to do some creative reading of parliamentary committee reports. But the other, the officers of parliament do a pretty good job. It's a caution. University of Moncton Professor Donald Savoie has written a lot about government and about the Auditor General in particular. And he cautions about some of the findings that the Auditor General makes that sort of step outside the realm of things that accountants can really pronounce upon in program decisions and things like that. Now I talk about that in the book as well. So the instruments that the citizen has for getting information out of government through parliamentary committees and officers of parliament are not perfect and they're not crystal clear. So I try in the book to provide ways of decoding what that means.
Just as a follow-up, though, but as I said, these groups exist. I mean, what I'm thinking is, where is the champion for uninvolved but engaged defense policy, if you would? I mean, if on the environmental side, then you have environmental defense organizations, and it's coming out of the woodwork. I mean, you can't wait to get away from. Where is their equivalent on the defense?
Well, apart from the Conference of Defense Associations Institute, there's also the Canadian Global Affairs Institute and the Macdonald Laurier Institute. But these, all of those institutes and those advocacy organizations are self-appointed to varying degrees. And politicians will listen to a lot of different things. That stuff is part of it, but they're also listening to the other stuff. So environmental issues, depending on your political stripe, you may be listening very closely to what the environmentalists are telling you, or not very closely because you're paying more attention to what industry is telling you. And that's just the way it is. So, but you're right, there isn't a defense-oriented or defense and security-oriented advocacy body in the country, and that's there hasn't been one for all of my working life, and I'm not sure how you go about creating one and getting it to be a voice that would be listened to any more than the think tanks that look at defense issues currently are. It's a challenge, and it's not the only thing. There's nobody advocating for official residences or other infrastructure, national infrastructure that needs to be kept fit for purpose somehow, but nobody wants to spend any money on it. So,
Of course. Years ago, you were talking about decisions that government makes that ultimately short-sighted. The process of recruiting people in the Canadian Forces changed years ago. To my knowledge, it hasn't changed yet. The idea to centralize all of the processing of people that show up to recruiting center take months and months and months before someone finally gets some answers. Are you still interested? Oh, I was interested 6 months ago. Is there any way that this could be brought up to the attention of whomever that might be, or reverse the decision to begin, or was in the 80s, for instance?
Yeah, so My understanding is that they have been doing a lot of work. I don't have direct knowledge as to exactly where things stand now, but there's been a very strong leadership focus on fixing recruiting. So you may remember retired Lieutenant General Andy Leslie. He was at a conference. I was at a conference with him, a small gathering with. Workshop actually with him about 6 or 8 months ago, and his answer was to turn recruiting back over to the reserves because they're distributed all across the country. They're in every town. They can turn things through process quickly. But what D&D or what the Canadian Armed Forces is embarked on in terms of reforming that, I couldn't tell you. But it is, I know they recognize the problem, and they're trying to move it.
Yes, sir. I could go on here for hours on a number of the points you discussed. Many of terrible. So let me just let's call it a radical approach in some respect when we talk about procurement. I'm an ex-Army guy, so I'll talk about the Navy just let me get that. It's not meant to be derogatory. It's meant to be concept and subtle. So if you go back to the frigate program that we had, it was, let's build these frigates, put all this money in there, and we'll build these things, and the world will come and buy more. Well, how did that work? And not very well. So now we're going through almost the same exercise again. I think from a conceptual point of view, given where we are in the shipbuilding world, I think we should really say, we need, I don't know, 15 platforms or whatever it happens to be. I'm talking about the major vessels. So go to a Korea or go to these guys who build these things, how many do you want next week? Great, out it comes. And I accept from a political point of view, said, well, we're not building that at Halifax or here or there. But at the end of the day, we're spending so much money for what capability? We're never going to get into the capability with the other people around the world. We're just not going to get there. That's realism. So therefore, if we turn around and say, and I'm philosophically going here, and to say, instead of waiting for a ship that's going to last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we say, it's going to last at the maximum 15, 20 years, and we're going to crank one out every year, or every 2 years, we're going to be cranking so many out. It's a flow the thing through. And what matters is what goes inside is the technology, and you're always changing the technology. But that conceptual approach, I think, is the government and the philosophy of it. This has to change. The way we're doing it now doesn't work. And you can make the same argument for airplanes, you can make the same argument for eggs, you can make the same argument for other things. It is, you buy what you need when you need it, and don't try and make this thing last forever. I mean, what happened during the war? We didn't build equipment to last forever. We built it because it's expendable, it's going to war. And yes, you have to have safety, and yes, you have the technology, but let's not drive on, what's the long-term logistics plan to keep this thing on 50 years? What a nonsense. It is absolute nonsense. Well, the commercial companies, they don't work that way. Why are we working that way? So that's the point I'm getting. I know one about many things, but I'll stop there.
So there's some interesting, you raised several issues there, which we can talk about. So first thing, the Halifax class frigates were not, they were built in 3 different shipyards, and to get them into the water as quickly as possible, and also to spread the work around the country, or the parts of the country. The current plans, as I understand it, is for the new River class to be built in one shipyard and sequentially in blocks. So they're going to build block 1 will be the 3 that they're building now, and then they'll be able to do a technology refresh for the next block and so on. The thing about sort of buying fire and forget hardware is it's still fairly complicated stuff, and it needs to be maintained. So a warship is the most complex item in the Canadian Armed Forces inventory by far, and it is a big honking mass of technology. very complex technology. And my view is we need to be able to maintain that worship as long as we have it in service. We can't be relying on an American or a Japanese or a South Korean or a Finnish shipyard to keep that technology refresh happening for us. For one reason, they have to privilege their own national requirements ahead of anybody else. Secondly, we're not a big enough customer to give us the muscle to be able to move them around. And so I had debates like this with naval officers while I was the strategic planner of the material group, when I was directed by my boss to come up with an alternative to the Joint Support Ship project, which is eventually going to deliver a couple of replenishment ships. And so he sent me an Army officer to do some research into how we can be smarter about how we would build a ship. It didn't end particularly well. The naval officers I was dealing with were very good-natured about it. But there's far more that I didn't know about the problem than I knew. So I think we just need to be a little bit cautious. I don't dispute that buying a military off the shelf, a standard design, has some merit in some circumstances, but there's a reason why we spent a lot of money and a lot of time to take 4 British submarines and refit them with not British fire control systems and equipment. Is because we have to be able to seamlessly work with our American friends, regardless of the political dynamic of today. And so I think we just need to go into this with eyes wide open and a long-term view of, as you say, how long are we really going to own this thing? How long should we own this thing? Should it be 50 years or should it be 20 years?
That's my point.
Most countries, for example, for fighter aircraft, most countries will fly a fighter aircraft for maybe 30 years, 35 years at the outset. We're going to be flying ours for 50 years, but almost 50 years by the time we take them out of service. And right now, only 40% of them are flying. So, and that's, we've done that over and over again. And that's what I'm getting at when I say the governments have been taking transactional views. You need to take a long-term strategic view. You need to make early decisions about the policy. Are we going to have this capability or not in 10 or 15 or 20 years? And if it's not, then we plan to get rid of it. If we are, then when does the decision need to be made to start the project to get the replacement? What's the lead time to get it done? And that has not happened. And that's, to my mind, is the biggest underlying problem or underlying cause of the problem that you pointed to.
Yes, sir.
So lots of geopolitical change on the go right now, and I hope you're able to take this question. The theme of the book is, the average Canadian citizen to assess, how is defense being shepherded. And with an election likely being announced on Sunday, what should the Joe average citizen be listening for, if anything, in the political platforms that are coming out to know that a particular party is taking defense in the right direction?
Good question. Thank you. I've written on this before. There was an article published the last election cycle by the National Post. The Globe and Mail wouldn't look at it, but the National Post published it. So there's a couple of things that have happened in elections. So we've had on a number of occasions, a party will have said, we are going to buy that thing, or we are not going to buy that thing, more often. Jean Chrétien in 1993 election said, I'm going to cancel, we're going to buy 0 helicopters. We'd already signed the contract for helicopters. So we spent, at that time, $500 million. It's north of $800 million, well north of 800 million today's dollars, to buy nothing. And they had to relaunch 2 projects instead of buying 1 helicopter to do 2 things. They bought 2 different fleets of helicopters, one of which is the Cyclone. Nice looking airplane. It seems to be very capable. First one crashed in the Ionian Sea, killed all 6 people aboard. But you know, these defense platforms do have issues early on in their service career. What's the problem with the Cyclone project is that 20 years in, they still haven't delivered the last aircraft, and they're nowhere near reaching full operational capability for the system. And that was a political decision and a political process and political interference, really, as I talk about in the book, in the process of defining the requirements so that the military operational requirements and the technical requirements in the formulation of advice to government. So the government got in the shorts of the project office to make sure that the way the requirement was defined didn't meant they were not going to buy an EH-101, because that was the one they canceled, and that was the one that got forced down their throats for the search and rescue part of the project. And as Pierre Lagueuse, a former ADM Materiel, said, I'd be testifying before a Senate committee several years ago with him, and we were talking about this episode, and he said the Prime Minister was not pleased when that search and rescue selection came up with the same helicopters that he had canceled the contract on. And so that's the first thing, is if you see a politician or political party saying, I'm going to buy that or I'm not going to buy that, they're in the wrong place. And don't walk away from them. What you should be looking for is an articulation from them of how they're going to approach the business of defense and managing the business of defense with a coherent long-term view of how to, where they want to get to and how they're going to get to from here. That means commitment to understanding where all of our systems, major systems, are in their life cycles, when you have to make decisions about this, that, or the other thing, about how you manage the personnel part of capability, and how they plan to ensure that the Canadian Armed Forces has the right numbers and the right type of people with the right kind of training to do the job that we want them to do. So I'd be looking for political platforms that speak in general terms about how they're going to manage that element of national capability better than has been done before. And no political party in this country has articulated anything like that in the past number of elections.
From a Canadian procurement perspective, are there any changes made, or are there some pressures that could be applied for the industry to be able to get into a defense contract where, as you said earlier, if you build some ships with the hope to sell them elsewhere, I think we bout ourselves, unless I'm mistaken here, we do not export. So I'm thinking when I was posted in Toronto, the Dimeco that would replace the C7, replace the FNC-1s, they probably hoped that they could sell those to others. They could not. So what's the impetus for industry to get into this business?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story about industry and getting back to the question about the Halifax class ships. We did make an attempt to sell the Halifax class ships to some Persian Gulf countries. A friend of mine was the Director General of Industry and International Programs at the time, went off on a trip to one of the Gulf states, can't remember which one, and he was selling ships, and the French had a guy go over to sell ships. And the French guy brought a big gift, a solid gold model of the French ship. Our guy brought a gift over there, an Inuit carving, nice carving, except it broke on the way over there. So he went into the embassy and they found some crazy glue to try and stick this thing back together again. You know, we don't play the game. We're not, you know, if you don't take a knife to a gunfight, and this country does not play that game to do the big sales. So I think unless we are going to play the game the way it is played internationally by most, and there's nothing untoward about the French bringing a very expensive gift. It's, you know, it's all done legally. It's all above board. There's no suitcases of money being passed around, at least not that we know of. So if we don't want to play the game, then don't try.
Yeah, I'm just going to make this the last question, unfortunately, so it's all questions after.
Yep.
Okay, yeah,
That's good.
I just wanted to add to that. So CCC sold labs to Saudi Arabia. So we had the helicopter fiasco with the Philippines. Adding to the point that you made is also the public appearance of selling weapons systems to a country that may use it against their own citizens, etc.
Yeah, so Professor Christian Lupprecht, who teaches at Queen's and RMC, has done some very interesting research in the area. And he's found that the arms trade treaty adherence by Canada is top-notch. But the treaty does not guarantee that stuff will not happen, that will embarrass the government that signed the export permit for equipment. The Turks have misdirected technology that we had released to them. They're a NATO ally. We should be able to rely on them and trust them. So if we're going to have defense industries, we're going to need to have defense exports. If we're going to have defense exports, we have to be realistic about what that means. That doesn't mean selling whatever to anybody who's got money. It means selective about who you're going to deal with. But you have to have some tolerance for risk that things are going to happen that you didn't expect and you didn't plan on. You make the best provisions you can in the agreement to sell. And the enforceability of that agreement to sell. And the Saudis had very restricted rules about how, you know, what they could do with those the labs. The issue that triggered a lot of the debate was not the labs. It was a commercial pattern up-armored commercial pattern SUVs from a couple of Canadian suppliers that were not subject to those kinds of restrictions in the lab project. My understanding is the Saudis adhered to the provisions in the contract that they signed with us. But that didn't save the government from drawing a lot of flack.